Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this virtual panel on managing urgent projects. My name is Benoit Degrasse. I'm the president of PMC Project Management Center, for those of you who don't know me. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a few seconds, but before I do, maybe just a couple of housekeeping items. Everybody, I think, is used to these Zoom sessions by now, but just in case anybody's wondering, first of all, this is being recorded, so it'll be available for you if you get disconnected or anything. We'll make it available on social media. Also, there's a Q&A section in Zoom that you can use to send us questions so that we can field questions from the audience. And we'll do our best to answer everybody. We might not have a chance to answer all questions, but we'll get to you one way or another, either by email or some other way. And of course, you can always connect with us on LinkedIn and via the website. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with Christine Beaulieu, who is our expert in interpersonal competency skills development. Hello, Christine.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello. We also have Michel Cambron, who is our expert in business analysis and project planning. Hello, Michel.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Hi. We have Serge Garon, who is our project management, risk management expert in-house here at PMC.
Hello, Benoit, and hello to all the participants.
And finally, last but not the least, Gilles Lalonde, who is our expert in creativity and problem solving. Hello, Gilles.
Hi there. Hi, Tom.
So we'll welcome everybody. Welcome online participants. So for those of you listening to us, just maybe a little bit of background to situate everybody. The five of us have been working for about close to 15 years, I think, for some of us, in various functions, in project management programs and training and so on. And when COVID hit, when the pandemic and the lockdown and everything hit us, we sort of realized that there wasn't much in the way of training offerings when it comes to managing urgent projects. And we'll talk a little bit about what that's all about. But it occurred to us that there was no specific offering for this sort of management problem. So we decided to put together this training program, virtual training program for now, in managing urgent projects. And we thought it would be a good opportunity today to kind of chat among ourselves about what that's all about and what does it require? What do project managers need to do when managing projects like this, whether it's a pandemic or maybe it's after a natural disaster. It could be just about anything. So maybe again, to continue on the background topic here, maybe Serge, you can kick us off. We know that all projects are on tight deadlines. So in that sense, all projects are urgent. But when we mean, managing urgent projects, it's a little bit more than that, isn't it? I'd like to hear you, Serge, about what exactly constitutes an urgent project and what makes it different from just managing, a project on a tight deadline.
Okay, we could start by saying that an emergency normally means that we must do something very important very quickly. Otherwise, we will lose opportunities or have penalties to pay. But ultimately, an emergency could become a crisis or a disaster. We could consider two contexts of crisis: a local crisis and a much larger crisis, normally called a major risk or a disaster. The local crisis affects a company, a department of the government, or a small population, and will cause disruptions that are important to our activities, our priorities, our resources. A local crisis could be the loss of key employees, important financing, a fire in our factory, or it could be positive, a sudden increase in the demand for our products. But one way or the other, we have to act very quickly and in a much more efficient way than normal project management. A major risk or disaster is an event which has very low probability, but if it occurs, it will affect a large population and the impact will be beyond the normal capability of the population to handle. The event of a major risk is normally legislated by laws on public health, for instance, and this will itself affect how we can handle projects during that period. Examples of major disasters could be the ice storm of '98, nuclear incident, the derailment of the train in Lac Mégantic, or the COVID-19. A major risk is always negative, but it could have positive opportunities for companies that can react very quickly. If we concentrate on major risk, there will be two large context situations, the local and so we have two situations to consider: a normal project during the crisis situation or a project to manage the crisis. I will explain the situation between those two a little later if we have the opportunity. But the most important point at this moment is to realize that a disaster or an emergency always force you to act in a different way, to be much more efficient. And one of the key factors is your management of the stakeholders. And in that regard, I would like to pass the microphone to my colleagues.
Right, great. So really what I'm also considering here, what I'm also thinking about is when we're talking about these kinds of projects, there are usually projects that we did not anticipate. So it wasn't something that we had as part of our strategic planning for the past couple of years, and then all of a sudden we're kicking it off. It's a project that we did not anticipate, so we had no time to plan. And so we're gonna have to do this in addition to having the tight deadline. We didn't have the luxury of preparation. So what I'm thinking is, and now I'm turning to the human factors side of things, is this must be extremely stressful for our individuals, for our team members, for the people around us. Stress, anxiety, uncertainty, these are all very negative emotions. So from a human factors point of view, I can anticipate some of the additional challenges that we'll have that Project Management 101 wouldn't exactly address. So Christine, you're our HR expert. What is it that we should be thinking about beyond our conventional and usual project management tools and techniques?
Great question. You're totally right. There's two kind of stress that we could have. It could be more a positive one based on stimulation. People will just, overachieve their own actions and deliverables and stuff like that. But there's also another nature of stress that come as more negative one based on emotion, based on impatience. And so if you're just thinking that all these people's stakeholders have to work together in this blend of different stress factor and different nature, well, that could be a clash sometimes. So I'm always relating to the Topman curve. Topman curves talk about 5 different phases as a productivity of a team. So at this point, we've got the storming coming up pretty heavily, there. So we've got to make sure that we've got to pass this phase as soon as possible to get to the norming one. Norming one meaning that we will work together as a team, building kind of a cohesion together, taking decision collectively. So as a project manager, you've got to make sure that the storming one is going to go as fast as possible. Maybe the kickoff activity, the kickoff meeting would be a great platform as bringing everyone together, virtually or not, but just making sure that we could know each other, we could just learn working together. This is a nice activity that you could just build from. I would say that another perspective is also as reinforcing many times throughout project the objective of it. Having a clear objective so people know the destination. Maybe they have different perspective of the way to get there, but at least they have a clear perspective of where they're going with the objective of project. A different platform as, solving issue, conflict, escalation perspective. So making sure that this is clear for everyone as well. And I think I would also mention maybe building a team charter. We all know the project charter, but what about the team charter? How to control or manage the behavior of people, how to make sure that value of your people or your team or your project will be clearly listed. So
right.
That's something I would bring. Also, just as a maybe final point, I think the best structure, project structure for that is the self-managed one. Putting a lot of, responsibility to your team, making sure that they have places, latitude of taking initiative in that, so that's bringing a lot of autonomy from them. And I think it's very valuable. Now, maybe one thing you have to be careful as a PM, you had been used to have a lot of control and authority. Now you're delegating it. So you've got to make sure that you have a healthy ego, because you will have to let go. And this is not something so easy to do. Frustration can come very deeply in this situation. So that would be my recommendation for dynamic of team.
Gilles,
Another point I might add to the human dynamics under stress would be communication. So communication usually is the poor child in any project. So people think, okay, I know how to talk, I know how to listen, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's totally false. Plus, with working at distance, you have now some complex technology to manage. Not everybody is familiar with that, depending on their age and their abilities. And therefore, communication is still very, very important under urgent projects. And it should be planned ahead of time. Does not need to be complicated, but at least think about it. And don't ever assume that everybody knows what they're supposed to do, because if you do, some people will misunderstand and do the wrong thing. And since you're short on time, if they do the wrong thing, it could be a disaster. So that's the only point I would add to what Christian has said.
Yeah, that's great. And I don't want to stay on the human factors side of things, but I want to go beyond the core team and talk a little bit about the stakeholders. So everybody, I think, knows about doing a stakeholder analysis grid, and the old classic, you've got your high, low interest, high, low influence on the project. Then we start to try as best we can to identify those stakeholders. Any other tips that we might remind everybody that we can use when pressed for time and working on such projects? Michel, maybe you can.
Yes, yeah, well, thanks for the question. Yes, when we talk about the stakeholders, we have to realize that in a project, depending on the size and nature, we can have a lot of stakeholders, and each stakeholder may belong to a group. And one way to look at these stakeholders is what are the issues we have to manage with each of these groups of stakeholders. So let's go down a couple groups. Just for example, the first group could be the user stakeholders. So who's going to use the end product or the end result of this project? And we have to make sure that we understand exactly what the requirements are, so that we design this solution to meet the requirements. So here, some of the issues is, do we understand what the user requirements are? And then do we have all the users? The second group is a little bit what Christine and Gilles just talked about, is the project team. And and one that's important to determine is roles and responsibilities, and define who's going to do what. Okay, either in work packages, or if you have a project teams, or if you have subcontractors, you want to put out some contracts. And then what the project manager is going to do is going to manage the commitments. So if the team commits to deliver what they're supposed to deliver, they have a good understanding of the outputs, they deliver it. Same thing as the suppliers, then it's going to facilitate the success of the project. The third group of stakeholders, we can look at the issues to manage, is which stakeholder has a stake or a decision authority on our projects, or they can have an approval authority. And these stakeholders, they could belong to the society, they could be part of the or they could be part of the government organization, or they can be internal to the organization, and their sort of mandate is to make sure that some things or some rules are respected. And for example, a good example, if you want to do a construction project, build a new bridge or a dam, you obviously going to have to talk to the Ministère de l'Environnement to make sure that, find out what are all the regulations they have to respect, and make sure that the stakeholder is going to be involved, because this stakeholder has the authorities to stop your project. Then the fourth stakeholder is what we call the affected stakeholders. And essentially, these are just affected by the presence of the project. And a good example is of these stakeholders is a couple of months ago, our Prime Minister of Quebec refused to grant the passage of the Trans-Canada pipeline because there was no social acceptability, because it impacted the Quebec population, and they perceived that there's no that they didn't want to have this pipeline. So stakeholder identification is really crucial, and there's different ways to find them. one good practice that we see in some standards is we use the life cycle of the solution that we're going to implement, and we look at each of the stages of this life cycle, and we determine what are the stakeholders are going to participate using the 4 categories, and that helps us out a lot to identify and make sure that we don't miss out on any of the stakeholders.
Cool.
I may have one based on the comment of Michel. One good tool that you could use as identifying role and responsibility is what we call the RACI chart. That's a simple one. I think people know that. And the 4 letters, simple, easy, and it point out pretty quickly a responsibility of execution, accountability of people who would be consulted or informed. So I think this grid is really useful. The only recommendation, and please do it at the beginning of the project as soon as possible, not later on because it's been requested. Put it, in front when you're starting your project, just to make sure that it's clear for everyone, and it will reduce conflict, potential conflict, and clarification of role. This is what we need as the urgent project classification. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, well, moving on to maybe more of the solution side of the formula here. One thing that strikes me whenever I teach PMP classes or I do PMBOK related courses on project management is how silent PMI or the PMBOK actually is on techniques for finding solutions. We have plenty of techniques for managing schedules, earned value, cost, budget, risk, etc. But when it comes to providing tools to our project managers and our teams on how to find solutions, especially, finding creative solutions to unusual problems, we're pretty silent when it comes to that, except maybe for brainstorming, which is about the extent that I've seen. Gilles, what else should we consider? What kind of tools should our project managers be equipped with in order to face this particular problem set?
Yeah, you're right, Benoit. As far as problem solving, there's not much in PMBOK or things like that. And funny enough is that project managers and business analysts, that's all they do basically all day long is solving problems right after the other. So problem solving is a skill which is pretty important. And especially if you are required to be creative about it, okay? It's another thing that you have to add in your problem analysis situation. The difficulty here compared to normally is that you still have to solve problem, but you have to do it very fast, okay? With probably less resources than normally. And that's where it hurts. Very often when I get called by a company president or whatever, they give me a mandate. They say, we've got this problem, okay? And I would tell you that 99% of the time, the problem they describe to me ends up to be totally changed afterwards because people don't talk about problems. Actually, they talk about solutions and causes. So you have to, first of all, solve a problem requires 2 steps. And the first one, the most important one, is defining correctly the problem. Michel was talking about defining requirements. Also, Serge was mentioning problems are also opportunities. So regardless of how you call it, you got to know what you're supposed to do thoroughly. So the phase of the problem definition is actually your worst nightmare. Okay, I've had a company, they had worked for 2 years on a project only to find out after they had followed a course on creative problem solving that, my God, they're not working on the right problem, okay? Funny enough, in 3 months, we redefined it completely, we validated, made some data research and so on and so forth. And finally, the definition of the problem was totally different. So your worst nightmare is to ill-define the problem, okay? And also, what's important is that when you define a problem is that you covered everything, you did not miss anything, okay? And it might be the thing that you miss, which is actually very important. So how you go about doing this, okay, is first of all, there's a sequence of steps that you have to follow when problem solving is involved. And you must not skip those steps, okay? Those steps might be done faster because the situation requires it, but you have to do it. Second, you have to consult, okay? Problem solving by yourself might be good, but it's always better with a lot of people, especially to define the situation. So you have to gather teams of people who don't think the same way, okay? Who see the problem from a different aspect, okay? And you don't need to ignore the shy people. Okay, it's not because you're shy that you're an idiot. Okay, actually, it's not the people who talk the most who have all the good ideas. It might be the shy ones who have it. Okay. Thirdly, you got to consult quickly, be efficient, avoid censorship. Okay, like if Benoit says something and I say, "Oh my God, this is great," immediately everybody who thought the opposite was shut up. Okay, maybe Benoit is right, but maybe he's not. Okay, so you got to avoid censorship, and then you got to have enough data to define a problem and do a good analysis. With a bunch of techniques that I use, we were able a few months ago to consult 150 managers in an hospital, okay, within 20 minutes only. You got out of it Arial 10 policy font, okay, Arial 10 font, 42 pages, okay, which we summarize in 100 different problems, okay? So there are ways to do it fast and do it properly. The second phase has to do with solution. So solution finding, you have to first ask yourself, okay, do I need to be creative, okay? The answer is not always, okay? If the problem is very simple, the solution is not creative, but will do the job, why go and search for something else? But in the context of urgency, very often you're limited on time, you're limited on people, you're limited on money, all kinds of things. So very often you will need to be creative, okay? So to be able to find solutions that nobody thought about, which don't cost much, but which are gonna beat the competition. So yes, most of the time you still need to be creative. The problem with creativity, and I think it was maybe in the introduction, it requires time to be creative, but you don't have time. So what do? You have to manage to put yourself in a creative mood very fast. There are ways of doing that, okay? Some has to do with humor, okay? Would you believe that they tested people listening to a Robin Williams video of 20 minutes, okay? And the bunch who did was 2 times more creative than the bunch who did not see that video, okay? Because that's how creativity works, okay? You gotta let go, okay? So there are techniques to do that. And there again, there's great benefits in sorting out people of different perspective in the team to find the solution. And with that, and techniques such as inverse thinking and function analysis, you can easily get some very, very creative solutions.
I'm mindful of the time. I'd like to make sure that we cover all of our topics here. So
Sorry.
earlier in the discussion, we started talking about risk, and it strikes me that when we talk about risk management, oftentimes people have a different understanding of what it means to manage risks. And I've had a bunch of engineers once debating risk management in the context of a bridge building project. And then I had half the engineers who were thinking, we got to manage the risk of an earthquake occurring during the life of the bridge. And then I had the other half of the team worried about what do you mean? What's the risk of an earthquake occurring during construction of the project? So there's different definitions for risk management. So I'm kind of turning to our risk expert here for this other topic. Serge, when it comes to crisis management, risk management, all these different things, they mean different things to different people. What are the different facets we have to consider here, and how are they relevant to our topic of concern here today?
Well, let me anchor the discussion by starting with the fact that the purpose of project risk management is to favor project success. That means meeting the success objectives of that project, as opposed to the purpose of disaster management, which is to reduce the losses and also to improve our capability to get back up quickly after the disaster. And both are related to reducing our vulnerability and improving our resilience. If a normal project is managed during a crisis, not only does it have to manage its normal project risks, like lack of resources, that kind of thing, but also the effects of the disaster. For instance, in the COVID situation, we have to not only manage the project normally, but also account for the fact that we need social distancing, that kind of thing. If I take the example of a construction project, like the building of a condo building downtown Montreal for delivery in July 2020, we all know that these kinds of projects were stopped in last May because of COVID. They got resurrected recently. But if the owners of those projects want to benefit from the housing market of this summer, they have to manage this project very rapidly at the same time while the COVID is still there. That will demand very innovative project management solutions. A project could be on the positive side as well, like companies that deliver communication systems using intranet, to not name any. These companies have seen their demand for their product increasing by a large amount in the past few months. If these companies want to help society and also benefit from it, they cannot manage projects the normal way. Now, if I concentrate on major disaster for a minute, we need to consider two types of project. A project to manage the major risk, and also the project to manage the actual crisis itself. The management of the risk, the major risk, means preparing for the risk. So it could be a few years long. It means it's a normal project with normal project management approaches to reduce our vulnerability and improve our resilience in case the crisis does occur later on. But a project to manage the actual crisis is an extreme situation, usually a chaotic situation. And the goal here is to reestablish essential services, protect people and services in order of priority, even though most people don't want to admit that, reduce all losses, and stop the cause of the risk. Usually it will take a few years after to get back to the previous situation, if we can get to that point. Just to use a train derailment as an example of all that, when the Lac-Mégantic train derailment occurred, that was a crisis. We had a project to manage this crisis that lasted a few days. It started when the first wagon exploded until a few days after the fire was over. But there's also a project to improve our resilience in the future. So moving the rail outside of the city center, that kind of thing. That's a major risk management project. So, but in either cases, whether a normal project is managed during a crisis or whether we manage the actual crisis, we have to be innovative in our approaches to project management, and otherwise we will not be able to make it. And in that sense, I believe some of my colleagues have already treated the point or have a few other things to add to this.
Well, we have an interesting question from the audience that I'd like to maybe field right now, because I think this question might be a good one for Christine. The question pertains to sponsor engagement, and we know that it's hard enough in regular situations to get our sponsors properly engaged. In a crisis situation, an emergency situation, their attention might be drawn elsewhere, and my project may not be the top one to like change where the rails are going through. What are some tips maybe that we could advise people on in order to maintain and obtain and maintain that sponsor engagement within the project?
Good question as well from the audience. As we said, in change management, before we start a project, normally we will evaluate what we call the vulnerability index. We don't have this opportunity doing it. Is it the proper timing? Will we have a lot of resistance, enough adhesion, enough people's getting into the projects and willing to just get them changed, procedures? We don't have that. We don't have this liberty of doing it. So of course, the sponsorship from the executive is crucial. Normally, this type of project has been supported a lot by our executive. My recommendation would have just to gather all the lever. We call it the lever that would push up, the changes, and just kind of flap down the obstacles as well. So we're trying to get these two type of arrow going in the reverse way, as upping, as kind of uplifting the potential changes. But the sponsorship it's a no-brainer. Now, don't forget that you have those silent leaders as well. Maybe not the top executive, maybe mid-management that could also serve as big leader for you. So make sure you could point them up and just get them into the project.
I get the feeling we could go on and on about these topics, and I love working with a bunch of passionate people about topics like this. And I mean, we're pressed for time, so I'll wrap up maybe by saying that just like any other project, you're going to have to manage a timeline. But how do you take the time to do, your proper critical path analysis and your Gantt chart, Microsoft Project P6, when, you're entering terra incognita, you're going into uncharted territory. You've never done this kind of project before. You have no idea how to do it. How are you possibly going to do a nice finish to start critical path schedule if you're tackling a problem for the first time and you have no time to think about it? What people tend to forget is we have techniques for these sorts of problems. They're most often we associate them with IT projects or manufacturing, but techniques like Kanban and time boxing are quite helpful when it comes to managing unknown projects in very tight, very short deadlines when we have no clue how to go about doing the work because we've never done it before. And so we don't have a preset recipe or process to do so. So there are techniques out there that people can bring to bear to their projects and can be very successful with them as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks all for being here today. I want to thank my panelists. I want to thank the audience as well. I want to remind everybody that, well, first of all, this event has been recorded, so it will likely be available on social media in the coming days, and we'll send you the link. But also the program that we put together is currently available for in-house delivery for if your company, your organization is interested in shoring up their skills in managing these kinds of projects. We can deliver this program in a virtual environment right now. We will be, however, announcing dates for public offerings and public enrollment sessions that should come within the next week or so. So stay tuned, watch on social media and on our website. You'll probably see it in your inbox at one of these days. I think I've covered everything. So thanks, everybody. Thank you all, everybody in the audience. And we hope to see you next time, maybe at another one of our virtual panels on project management. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you,
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.